The alarm clock buzzed at exactly 5 in the morning, a harsh and vibrating sound that shattered the silence of the suburban bedroom. Donald reached out a callous hand and silenced it immediately, his movements practiced and careful so as not to wake the woman sleeping beside him. He lay there for a moment in the darkness, listening to the soft and rhythmic breathing of his wife, Glenda. This was the only time of day when things felt peaceful, before the sun came up and the reality of their fractured lives took hold. Donald slid out of bed, his feet touching the cold hardwood floor. He walked to the closet and pulled out his work clothes. It was a navy blue jumpsuit, the kind worn by maintenance workers, janitors, and plumbers. The fabric was stiff and smelled faintly of industrial soap and machine grease. He looked at the name patch sewn onto the chest. It read simply Donald. There was no title, no rank, just his name. He ran his thumb over the stitching, feeling a sense of pride that nobody else in his life seemed to understand. He carried the uniform into the bathroom to change, closing the door softly. He splashed cold water on his face, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He saw tired eyes and graying hair, the face of a man who worked with his hands and broke his back every single day. But behind those eyes there was a secret, a heavy and golden secret that he had kept hidden for 3 years. To the world, and even to his own wife, Donald was just a janitor. He fixed leaking pipes, he mopped muddy hallways, and he changed flickering light bulbs. But the reality was far more complex. Donald was the sole owner of the Sterling Heights Tower, the massive 40-story glass skyscraper in the center of the city where he worked. He had inherited the real estate empire from his father, a man who believed that you could not lead men if you did not know how to sweep a floor. His father's dying wish had been for Donald to work every job in the building before taking the CEO chair. Donald had taken it to heart. He wanted to know every bolt, every wire, and every employee before he revealed his true identity. But the experiment had gone on longer than intended, largely because of Glenda. He stepped into the jumpsuit and zipped it up. As he walked back into the bedroom to grab his keys, the bedside lamp flicked on. Glenda was awake. She sat up against the silk pillows, her hair perfectly messy, her face twisted in a look of mild disgust. She squinted at him, her eyes scanning the blue uniform with disdain. "You are wearing that thing again," she said, her voice dripping with sleep and irritation. "It smells like chemicals, Donald. Honestly, it makes the whole room smell like a public restroom." Donald paused, his hand on the doorknob. "It is my job, Glenda," he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. "It pays the bills, it puts food on the table." Glenda laughed, a sharp and cruel sound. "It barely pays the bills, Donald. If it wasn't for my bonus last quarter, we would still be driving that rusted truck of yours. Look at you. You're 40 years old and you are wearing a name tag. Do you know how humiliating that is for me?" Donald felt the familiar sting in his chest, the dull ache of being undervalued by the person he loved the most. He wanted to scream the truth. He wanted to tell her that the bonus she bragged about came from a company that leased office space from him. He wanted to tell her that he could buy her company, fire her boss, and turn the building into a parking lot if he wanted to, but he bit his tongue. He needed to know she loved him for him, not for the millions in the trust fund. "I am proud of honest work, Glenda," he said simply. Glenda rolled her eyes and flopped back onto the pillows. "Just go. And please, shower at the gym before you come home tonight. We have dinner with the Millers next week, and I don't want you smelling like bleach when we discuss my promotion." Donald left the house without another word. He drove his modest sedan through the waking city, the streets slick with morning dew. The drive gave him time to think. He remembered when they first met. Glenda had been a junior associate, hungry and ambitious, but sweet. She used to admire his work ethic. She used to say that she loved a man who could fix things. But as she climbed the corporate ladder, as she started making 6 figures and attending galas, something shifted. The suits got sharper, the heels got higher, and her patience for Donald's blue-collar life evaporated. Now, she was a senior marketing director at Omnicorp, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. And coincidentally, Omnicorp was the anchor tenant on the 30th floor of the Sterling Heights Tower, Donald's building. He arrived at the service entrance of the tower. He swiped his keycard, the one that gave him access to the basement levels. The security guard, a gentle older man named Samuel, was sitting at the desk with a cup of coffee. Samuel was one of the few people who knew the truth. "Morning, Mr. Sterling," Samuel said, starting to stand up. Donald waved him down immediately. "Easy, Sam. It is just Donald. You know the rules." Samuel chuckled and sat back down. Right, just Donald. But hey, the air conditioning on the 30th floor is acting up again. The big boss up there, Mr. David Thorne, he is screaming his head off, says it is too hot for his expensive suits." Donald tightened his jaw at the mention of the name. David Thorne, the regional vice president of Omnicorp, Glenda's boss. David was everything Donald was not. He was tall, impeccably dressed in custom Italian wool, drove a Porsche and treated the service staff like furniture. Glenda spoke about him constantly. David this, David that. David knows wine, David knows strategy. David is a visionary. Donald grabbed his tool belt and slung it over his shoulder. "I will take care of it, Sam. Let me go see what the visionary is complaining about today." Donald took the freight elevator up to the 30th floor. As the doors opened, the atmosphere changed instantly. The air was cool and smelled of expensive perfume and fresh espresso. The carpet was plush beneath his work boots. He kept his head down, walking toward the maintenance closet to check the thermostat readings. The office was buzzing with activity. Phones were ringing, assistants were rushing back and forth with tablets, and in the center of it all stood David Thorne. He was leaning against a glass desk, laughing loudly at something. Standing next to him, holding a stack of files and looking up at him with undeniable adoration, was Glenda. Donald froze. He watched from the shadow of the hallway. Glenda was wearing her new cream-colored suit, the one she said she was saving for a special occasion. She was smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at Donald in years. It was a smile full of energy and eagerness. David said something and placed a hand on Glenda's shoulder. It was a casual gesture, perhaps too casual. His hand lingered there, his thumb brushing the fabric of her jacket. Glenda didn't pull away. In fact, she leaned into it slightly. Donald felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He gripped the wrench in his pocket, his knuckles turning white. "Hey, you!" a voice snapped Donald out of his trance. He turned to see David pointing a manicured finger at him. "The janitor. The toilet guy. Whatever you are, get over here." Donald took a deep breath, swallowed his pride, and walked over. "Yes, sir. Is there a problem?" David sneered, looking Donald up and down with amusement. Glenda turned around and her face went pale. She looked horrified to see her husband standing there in his grease-stained jumpsuit in front of her boss. She took a half-step away from him, as if his poverty was contagious. "The problem," David said, stepping closer and looming over Donald, "is that I pay a fortune in rent for this office, and yet I am sweating. Fix the AC, and try not to touch anything with those dirty hands. This furniture costs more than your house." Glenda looked down at her files, refusing to meet Donald's eyes. She didn't defend him. She didn't say, "Actually, that is my husband." She just stood there silent and ashamed. Donald looked at David, then at Glenda. "I will check the vents, sir," Donald said, his voice flat. "Just make it quick," David said, turning his back on him. "Glenda, come into my office. We need to discuss the itinerary for the weekend." Donald turned and walked toward the utility room, his heart pounding in his ears. Weekend? What weekend? He opened the utility panel and pretended to check the wiring, but his ears were straining to hear the conversation. The door to David's office was open. He heard David's booming voice. "The presentation is in Miami, Glenda. We fly out tonight, first class. I booked us suites at the Royal Palm. It is going to be intense work, but I think we can find some time to relax by the pool." He heard Glenda giggle. A soft, nervous, excited giggle. "Oh, David, that sounds amazing. I just need to tell Donald I have a conference. He won't understand the business side of things, so I will just keep it vague." Donald felt like he had been punched in the gut. He stared at the wires, the red and the blue, blurring together. She was lying. There was no conference. He knew the building schedule. He knew Omnicorp's schedule because as the landlord, he received their operational briefs. There was no major conference in Miami this weekend. It was a lie, a trip for two. Suites, first class. And she was going to tell him it was work. He finished the job, or at least pretended to, and took the elevator back down to the basement. He sat on a crate in the storage room, surrounded by mops and buckets, and put his head in his hands. Today was Friday, tomorrow was Saturday, October 12th, their 5th wedding anniversary. He had spent months planning a surprise. He had restored a vintage convertible, a car she had always talked about when they were dating, intending to unveil it tomorrow. He had reservations at the little Italian place where they had their first date. He had bought a diamond necklace, not with his secret fortune, but with money he had saved from his janitor paycheck, working overtime shifts, just to show her that his hard work meant something. And she was going to Miami with David. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A text from Glenda. "Hey honey, bad news. The boss needs me to travel last minute for a client merger in Miami. I have to leave tonight. I will be back Monday. Love you." Donald stared at the screen. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. She didn't even call. Just a text. "Love you." The words looked hollow, like a script she was reading. He typed back, his fingers trembling slightly. "But tomorrow is the 12th, our anniversary." He hit send and waited. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally the response came. "Oh God, I completely forgot. I'm so sorry, Donald, but I can't say no to David. This is for my career. We will celebrate when I get back. Don't be mad. Order yourself a pizza." Order yourself a pizza, that was it. 5 years of marriage, dismissed with a pizza recommendation. Donald stood up. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. For years he had played the role of the supportive, humble husband. He had allowed her to belittle him because he thought she was just stressed. He had allowed her to mock his uniform because he thought she was just ambitious. But this was different. This was betrayal. This was disrespect on a fundamental level. He walked over to his locker and pulled out his street clothes, but then he stopped. He looked at the reflection in the locker mirror. He saw the janitor, and then he saw the man beneath, the man who owned the building, the man who could buy and sell David Thorne 10 times over. "I am not ordering a pizza," Donald whispered to the empty room. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number. It was his personal assistant, a woman who managed his real estate assets from a remote office. "Sarah," he said, his voice firm, "I need the corporate jet prepped. I need a flight to Miami within the hour. And get me a room at the Royal Palm Hotel. The penthouse suite if it is available. If it isn't, buy the booking out from whoever has it." Sarah didn't ask questions. She knew the tone. "Consider it done, Mr. Sterling. Are you traveling for business or pleasure?" "Business," Donald said, his eyes narrowing. "Strictly business." He left the building through the executive exit, a private door that led directly to the VIP garage where his actual car, a matte black luxury sedan, was kept under a tarp. He didn't go home to pack. He didn't want to see the house that Glenda treated like a hotel. He drove straight to the airfield. As he drove, the plan began to form in his mind. He wasn't going to confront her over the phone. He wasn't going to beg her to stay. He was going to show up. He was going to see it with his own eyes. He needed to know if she was just a workaholic who forgot an anniversary or if she was truly gone. He arrived at the private hangar as the sun was beginning to set. The jet was waiting, its engines already humming. He boarded the plane, still wearing his janitor uniform. The flight attendant, who knew him well, looked surprised but said nothing. She handed him a glass of scotch. He sat in the leather seat and looked out the window as the plane taxied down the runway. He thought about the flowers he would buy when he landed. He thought about the necklace in his pocket. He was holding on to a shred of hope. Maybe she really was working. Maybe he would walk into the hotel lobby and find her in a meeting room, stressed and tired, and she would be happy to see him. Maybe he was the villain for doubting her. The flight was smooth, but Donald's mind was turbulent. He landed in Miami under the cover of night. The air was thick and humid. A driver was waiting for him with a sign that said, "Sterling." Donald got into the back of the limousine. "Take me to a flower shop first," Donald said. Then the Royal Palm. He bought 24 red roses. Expensive ones, long-stemmed. If this was going to be a disaster, he wanted to be armed with love until the very last second. He wanted to have no regrets. The car pulled up to the Royal Palm Hotel, a towering structure of white concrete and blue glass overlooking the ocean. It was the kind of place where money wasn't just spent, it was flaunted. Valets in white jackets were parking Ferraris and Lamborghinis. Donald stepped out of the limousine. He had changed on the plane into a simple suit he kept on board, but he still felt like the janitor inside. He clutched the flowers. He walked through the revolving doors into the lobby. The air conditioning was freezing, a sharp contrast to the Miami heat. The lobby was filled with beautiful people, laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. Donald walked to the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight bun and a tired smile, looked up. "Checking in?" she asked. "I have a reservation," Donald said, "but I am actually looking for my wife. She checked in earlier today. Glenda Sterling, or maybe Glenda Miller. She uses her maiden name for work sometimes." The receptionist typed on her keyboard. Her eyes scanned the screen. "I see a booking for the Omnicorp group," she said, "but I don't see a room under Glenda Sterling or Miller." Donald frowned. "She said she was staying here. Are you sure?" "I am sure, sir. The only booking for that party is the presidential suite on the top floor, registered to a Mr. David Thorne." Donald felt the floor tilt beneath him. One room, the presidential suite, registered to David. Is there anyone else registered to that room?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The receptionist hesitated. She looked at Donald, then at the flowers in his hand. Her expression softened into something resembling pity. She lowered her voice. "The registration lists Mr. Thorne and a guest. Mrs. G. Thorne. Mrs. G. Thorne." She was using his name. She was pretending to be his wife. Donald felt a surge of nausea. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was identity theft. It was a complete erasure of his existence. He gripped the flowers so tightly that a thorn pierced his palm, but he didn't feel the pain. He felt only a cold, dark resolve spreading through his veins. "Thank you," he said to the receptionist. He turned away before she could say anything else. He walked toward the elevators. He didn't press the button for the penthouse immediately. He stood there, watching the numbers change as the cars went up and down. He was the man who owned the building she worked in. He was the man who signed her boss's lease. He was the man she called a loser. And now he was the man who was about to take the longest elevator ride of his life. He pressed the button. The doors slid open. He stepped inside, alone. The mirrored walls reflected a man holding roses, a man who looked like he was about to celebrate a triumph. But as the elevator began to ascend, rising toward the penthouse, Donald knew that he wasn't going up to celebrate. He was going up to witness the execution of his marriage. The numbers climbed. 10, 20, 30. The doors dinged softly at the top floor. They slid open to reveal a private hallway. There was only one door at the end. Room 401. Donald walked down the hallway. The carpet was thick, silencing his footsteps. He reached the door. It was heavy, mahogany, solid. He raised his hand to knock, to pound on the wood, to scream her name. But then he stopped. He heard a sound from inside. It wasn't the sound of a business meeting. It wasn't the sound of a merger negotiation. It was the sound of laughter, David's booming, arrogant laugh. And then Glenda's voice, clear, happy, and unburdened. "Oh, stop it, David," she squealed. "You are terrible." "I am serious." David's voice came through the wood, muffled but audible. "You should see him. He looks like a giant blue Smurf in that jumpsuit. Does he actually come home wearing that trash?" Every day, Glenda laughed. "It is disgusting. I tell him to shower at the gym. I mean, honestly, how did I end up with a janitor? I deserve so much better." "You do, babe," David said. "And now you have it. To us. And to the big promotion." Donald's hand froze in midair. He didn't knock. He didn't kick the door down. He stood there, the roses heavy in his hand, as the words sank into his soul. "How did I end up with a janitor?" He lowered his hand. He looked at the door one last time. He didn't need to see them. He had heard enough. The man who walked into the hotel was a husband hoping to save his marriage. The man who stood in the hallway now was something else entirely. He was the owner, and he was about to start the eviction process. Donald turned around. He walked back to the elevator, his steps silent, his face a mask of stone. He pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, hiding the hallway from view, he looked at the roses. He dropped them on the floor of the elevator. They lay there, a pile of bright red on the marble floor, abandoned and tragic. He took out his phone. He didn't text Glenda. He didn't call her. He opened his contacts and scrolled down to a number he hadn't used in a long time. It was the number for his family's corporate attorney, a man known in the legal world as the Shark. He hit dial. It rang once. "Hello?" A sharp voice answered. "Donald? Is everything okay?" "No," Donald said. his voice calm and terrifyingly cold. "Everything is far from okay. I need you to open a file." "What kind of file?" the lawyer asked. "Divorce," Donald said, "and corporate litigation. I want to terminate a commercial lease. The tenant is Omnicorp, and I want to do it in the most painful way possible." He stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, walking past the receptionist who watched him with sad eyes. He walked out into the humid Miami night, leaving the hotel, the flowers, and his wife behind. The surprise was over. The war had just begun. The flight back from Miami was a blur of darkness and silence. Donald sat in the same leather seat of his private jet, but the Scotch glass in his hand remained untouched. The engines hummed a steady, monotonous rhythm that seemed to mock the chaos in his mind. He didn't sleep. He couldn't close his eyes without seeing the image of that hotel door, without hearing the echo of Glenda's laughter. It wasn't just the infidelity that burned in his chest like a hot coal. It was the disdain, the sheer, unadulterated lack of respect. She hadn't just sought comfort in another man's arms. She had built a bond with him based on the ridicule of her husband. They had bonded over his blue-collar uniform, unaware that the uniform was a choice, not a cage. When the jet touched down on the private airstrip, the sky was beginning to turn a bruised purple with the coming dawn. It was Sunday morning. Donald thanked the pilot with a nod, his voice gone. He got into his car and drove back to the house that Glenda called a shack, the house he had bought because it was cozy and unpretentious. He pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. The silence of the suburbs felt heavy. He walked inside, the familiar scent of her vanilla air freshener hitting him like a physical blow. He stood in the living room, looking at the photos on the mantel. Their wedding photo. Glenda smiling, looking at him with what he thought was love. Now he saw the calculation in her eyes. He saw a woman who had settled for a safe bet while she hunted for a bigger prize. He had 24 hours before she returned. He needed to scrub the last 12 hours from existence. He took his suit off and hung it in the back of the closet, buried behind his winter coats. He took the receipt for the flowers, which he had shoved into his pocket, and burned it in the kitchen sink, watching the paper curl and turn to ash. He washed the ash away with cold water. He needed to be Donald the janitor again. He needed to be the simple, unsuspecting husband who waited at home while his important wife conquered the business world. It was the hardest acting role of his life, but he had to play it. If he confronted her now, she would spin a web of lies. She would cry. She would blame the stress. She would say it was a one-time mistake, and David Thorne would escape unscathed. No, Donald didn't want a confrontation. He wanted a demolition. He spent Sunday moving through the house like a ghost. He fixed a loose hinge on the back door. He mowed the lawn. He did the things a good, simple husband does. But his mind was sharpening. He went into his small home office, a converted closet that Glenda laughed at, and turned on his old desktop computer. He logged into their joint bank account. He rarely checked it, trusting Glenda to manage the household expenses since she claimed to be the financial wizard. What he saw made his blood run cold. The savings account, the one they were building for a vacation home, was depleted. There were withdrawals of thousands of dollars, labeled as vague expenses like consultation fees and household maintenance. Donald clicked on the details. The money wasn't going to contractors. It was being transferred to a secondary account he didn't recognize, and the credit card bills. He pulled up the statements. High-end dinners, designer clothing boutiques, a charge for a men's luxury watch store. He looked at the date. It was 2 weeks ago. Glenda had bought a $5,000 watch. Donald looked down at his own wrist, bare and tanned. She hadn't bought it for him. He printed the statements, his hands shaking with a mix of rage and adrenaline. He folded the papers and hid them inside the hollow leg of his desk, a hiding spot he had used for cash in the past. This was the ammunition he needed. It wasn't just adultery. It was embezzlement of their marital assets. She was funding her affair with his hard-earned money, or at least the money she thought was his entire worth. She had no idea about the trust, the offshore accounts, the real estate portfolio. She was stealing crumbs from a bakery, thinking she was robbing the vault. Monday evening came with the sound of a car door slamming. Donald was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. He wore his favorite flannel shirt, the one Glenda said made him look like a lumberjack who got lost in the city. He heard the key in the lock. He took a deep breath, forcing his facial muscles to relax, forcing a smile onto his lips. The door opened and Glenda breezed in, pulling a rolling suitcase behind her. She looked radiant. Her skin was glowing, likely from the Miami sun, and she wore a new silk scarf around her neck. "Honey, I am home," she called out, her voice bright and cheery. The lie hung in the air, sickeningly sweet. Donald turned from the stove. "Welcome back," he said. The words tasted like bile. "How was the conference?" Glenda sighed dramatically, dropping her bag and slumping onto a kitchen chair. "Oh, Donald, it was exhausting. Just meetings upon meetings. I barely saw the sun. David is such a slave driver. He had us going over spreadsheets until midnight every night. My feet are killing me." Donald watched her carefully. She was a professional liar. The fatigue in her voice sounded genuine. If he hadn't stood outside her hotel room door, if he hadn't heard the laughter and the champagne corks popping, he would have believed her. He walked over and poured her a glass of wine from the cheap bottle she allowed him to buy. "I am sorry you had to work so hard," he said, placing the glass in front of her. "Especially on our anniversary weekend." Glenda paused. A flicker of guilt crossed her face, but it vanished instantly, replaced by a practiced pout. "I know. I felt terrible, Donald, really. I was sitting in that boardroom thinking about you the whole time, but look, I brought you something." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small plastic keychain. It was a generic souvenir, a little palm tree that said Florida. She tossed it onto the table. "I picked it up at the airport. I know you like little trinkets for your truck. A plastic keychain." She had spent the weekend in a 5-star penthouse, drinking vintage wine and laughing at his expense, and she brought him a $3 piece of plastic. Donald picked it up. He ran his thumb over the cheap edges. "It is beautiful, Glenda. Thank you." She took a long sip of wine, her eyes scanning the kitchen. "Did you fix that leak in the bathroom?" "Yes," Donald said. "I fixed it yesterday." "Good." Glenda stood up. "I am going to take a shower. I feel gross from the plane. We can talk more later." "Oh, and Donald." "Yes?" "We need to talk about the budget. The car needs new tires, and I think we need to cut back on groceries this month. Things are a little tight." Donald gripped the edge of the counter. Things were tight because she was funneling money to her secret life. "Okay," he said softly. "We can look at the numbers." As soon as the bathroom door clicked shut and the shower water started running, Donald moved. He didn't scream. He didn't throw the pasta sauce against the wall. He picked up his phone and walked out to the back porch. The night air was cool. He dialed the number for Arthur Vance, the senior partner at the law firm that handled his corporate affairs. Arthur was the only man Donald feared, and the only man he trusted completely with legal warfare. "Arthur," Donald said when the line connected. "Donald, it is late. Is everything all right with the tower?" "The tower is fine. This is personal. I need you to clear your schedule for tomorrow morning. I am coming in." "Personal?" Arthur's voice shifted, becoming sharper. "Is this about the wife?" "It is about the wife, and it is about the tenant on the 30th floor. I am invoking the termination clause in Omnicorp's lease, and I am filing for divorce. But Arthur, I don't want a settlement. I want a forensic accounting of her life. I want to know every cent she has spent in the last 5 years. I want to know who she was with, where she went, and what she said." "I can have a private investigator on her by morning," Arthur said. His tone was professional, devoid of pity. "If she is crossing you, Donald, we will leave her with nothing but the clothes on her back." "That is the plan," Donald said. "I will see you at 9. He hung up and went back inside. He finished cooking dinner. When Glenda came out of the shower, wrapped in a plush robe smelling of his shampoo, he served her a plate of pasta. He sat across from her and watched her eat. He listened to her talk about the fake presentations and the fake clients. He nodded at the right times. He smiled when she made a joke. He was gathering evidence. Every lie she told was another brick in the wall he was building around her. "So," Glenda said, wiping her mouth with a napkin, "David was talking about a big promotion for me. If this merger goes through, I could be looking at a VP title. That would mean a huge raise, Donald. We could finally move out of this dump and buy a real house in a gated community. You wouldn't have to work so hard. Maybe you could even quit that janitor job and find something more dignified." Donald chewed slowly. More dignified. Like sleeping with the boss, he thought. "That sounds great, Glenda," he said aloud. "I would love for you to be a VP." He meant it. He wanted her to fly as high as possible. He wanted her to be at the very peak of her career, standing on the edge of the cliff, looking down at the world she thought she owned. Because the fall would be so much more devastating from up there. The next morning, Donald followed his routine. He woke up at 5. He put on the blue jumpsuit. He endured Glenda's complaints about the smell. He drove to the tower. But instead of going to the basement, he drove into the VIP garage. He parked next to his covered luxury sedan. He opened the trunk of his work car and pulled out a garment bag. Inside was a charcoal grey bespoke suit, a white shirt with French cuffs and a silk tie. He changed in the private bathroom of the executive garage. He slicked back his greying hair. He put on a pair of gold cufflinks that cost more than Glenda's annual salary. He took the private elevator up to the top floor, not the 30th floor where Omnicorp was, but the 40th floor, the penthouse office, the headquarters of Sterling Holdings. His secretary, Sarah, was waiting for him with a cup of coffee and a thick file. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she said, not blinking an eye at his transformation. "Mr. Vance is waiting for you in the conference room." Donald took the coffee. "Thank you, Sarah. Cancel my appointments for the morning. And call security. I want the surveillance logs for the 30th floor for the last 6 months. Every entry, every exit, specifically for David Thorne's office." He walked into the conference room. Arthur Vance was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table. He was a small man with glasses and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He had a notepad in front of him. "Donald," Arthur said, nodding. "You look like yourself again." "I feel like myself," Donald said, sitting down. He placed the plastic palm tree keychain on the table. It clattered loudly against the wood. "What is that?" Arthur asked. "That is what my wife thinks I am worth," Donald said. "A $3 souvenir. Let's make sure she finds out the exchange rate." Arthur opened his notepad. "I ran a preliminary check on her financials last night after you called. You were right. She has a secondary account under her maiden name. There are regular transfers from your joint account. But there is something else. Large deposits coming from an account linked to Omnicorp. Bonus payments that were never declared on her tax returns." "Hush money?" Donald asked. "Or incentive payments?" Arthur tapped the paper. "If she is involved with Thorne, she might be helping him skim off the top. Thorne has been under suspicion by his own board of directors for months, rumors of kickbacks from contractors. If your wife is washing money for him, she isn't just a cheater, Donald, she is a felon." Donald leaned back in his chair. A felon. That changed the game. It wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was leverage. "If we can prove she is complicit," Donald said, staring out the window at the city skyline, "we can use it. But I don't want to show our hand yet. I want them to feel safe. I want David to think he is the king of the castle." "When is their next big board meeting?" "Friday," Arthur said. "The quarterly review. The global CEO of Omnicorp is flying in from New York." "Friday," Donald repeated. "That gives us 4 days. 4 days to gather the evidence. 4 days to let them dig their own graves." He stood up and walked to the window. He could see the reflection of the room in the glass. He saw a powerful man, a dangerous man. But in his mind, he was still the janitor, scrubbing the floor, ignored and invisible. He would use that invisibility one last time. "Arthur," Donald turned back. "I need to go back downstairs. I need to put the jumpsuit back on." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Why? You have enough to bury them now." "Not yet," Donald said. "I need to hear what they say when they think nobody is listening. I need to know exactly how they plan to get rid of me. Because Glenda mentioned a plan for the future. I need to know if that plan involves just a divorce or something worse." "You are playing a dangerous game," Arthur warned. "I know," Donald said, buttoning his jacket, "but I own the board. I make the rules." He left the office, went back down to the garage and changed back into the blue jumpsuit. He rubbed a little grease on his cheek for effect. He picked up his tool belt. He looked in the mirror. The eyes were different now. They weren't tired. They were predatory. He took the freight elevator up to the 30th floor. The doors opened. The receptionist ignored him. The junior executives walked past him without a glance. He was part of the scenery. He walked toward David Thorne's office. The door was closed, but the blinds were partially open. He could see Glenda inside. She was sitting on the edge of David's desk, her legs crossed, laughing. David was standing between her knees, whispering something in her ear. Donald pulled out his phone. He opened a maintenance app that controlled the building's systems. He tapped a button labeled Ventilation Executive Suite Override. Inside the office, the air conditioning vent suddenly hissed loudly, then went silent. The room would start heating up in minutes. David looked up, annoyed. He slammed his hand on the desk and yelled, "Where is that useless janitor?" Donald smiled. He stepped out from the hallway, his head bowed, his tool belt clanking. "Right here, sir," Donald said, stepping into the lion's den. "Just doing my job." Glenda looked at him, her eyes wide with a mix of annoyance and hidden panic. She smoothed her skirt and hopped off the desk. Donald didn't look at her. He looked at the vent, then at David. "Fix it," David barked. "It is stifling in here." "I will need to get up into the ceiling," Donald said. "It might take a while. I will have to be in here with you." David rolled his eyes. "Fine. Just be invisible. We have business to discuss." Donald set up his ladder. He climbed up, removing the ceiling tile. He wasn't just fixing a vent. He was planting a listening device. A high-powered audio bug that Arthur had given him, smaller than a coin. He stuck it to the inside of the vent grill. He climbed down. "All done, sir. It should cool down in a minute." "Get out," David said, waving his hand. Donald gathered his tools. He walked to the door. As he closed it, he heard Glenda's voice, clear as a bell. "God, he is so pathetic. I almost feel bad for taking half his pension when I leave him." Donald paused. His hand tightened on the doorknob. He didn't turn back. He just closed the door softly. Half the pension. She was dreaming small. She had no idea she was about to lose everything. Donald walked down the hallway, the audio feed from the bug already streaming to his phone. He put his earbuds in. He was going to hear every word. The investigation had moved from the financial to the tactical, and he was the fly on the wall who carried a sledgehammer. Donald sat in the cool darkness of the server room on the 42nd floor, a restricted area that even David Thorne did not know existed. The hum of the massive computer bank surrounded him, a white noise that helped him focus on the voices streaming through his earbuds. He had traded his janitor jumpsuit for his suit again, but his heart was still pounding with the adrenaline of a spy behind enemy lines. On the screen of his laptop, the audio levels spiked as David Thorne spoke inside the office 2 floors below. The bug Donald had planted in the vent was working perfectly, capturing every rustle of paper and every intake of breath. "Just sign right here on the dotted line, babe," David's voice said, smooth and coercive. "It is just a standard vendor procurement form. Corporate needs it to process the budget for your new department." There was a pause. Donald could hear the hesitation in Glenda's silence. He closed his eyes, visualizing the scene. She would be holding the pen, hovering over the paper, her ambition warring with her common sense. "I do not know, David." Glenda's voice came through, sounding smaller than usual. "This invoice is for a company called Apex Solutions. I have never heard of them. And the amount is $50,000 for consultation services. We haven't used any consultants this quarter." David laughed, a dismissive sound that grated on Donald's nerves. "That is why you are still a director and I am a VP, Glenda. This is how the big leagues work. Apex is a strategic partner. We pay them a retainer to keep them available. If you want that vice president title, you need to show the board that you are decisive. You need to show them you can handle the budget without getting bogged down in the minutiae. Unless, of course, you don't trust me." The manipulation was textbook. Donald clenched his fists. David was baiting her, using her desire for status as a weapon against her own judgment. If she signed that document, she wasn't just authorizing a payment, she was authorizing fraud. Apex Solutions was likely a shell company owned by David, a way to siphon money out of Omnicorp before the quarterly audit. And by having Glenda sign it, David was keeping his own hands clean. She would be the one on the hook for embezzlement. "I trust you," Glenda said softly. "Of course I trust you." "Then sign it," David whispered. "And then we can discuss what you are going to wear to the gala on Friday. I want you in red. It drives me crazy." The sound of the pen scratching against paper echoed in Donald's ears like a nail on a chalkboard. She had done it. She had just committed a felony for a man who viewed her as disposable. Donald stopped the recording and saved the file. He had the smoking gun, but he needed more than a gun, he needed the entire arsenal. He packed up his laptop and left the server room, taking the service elevator down to the garage. He had a meeting with Arthur Vance and a private investigator Arthur had recommended, a man named Marcus who specialized in corporate espionage. They were meeting at a diner on the edge of the city, a place where billionaire real estate tycoons and high-powered lawyers were unlikely to be seen. When Donald arrived, wearing his flannel shirt and jeans to blend in, Arthur and Marcus were already in a booth. Marcus was a heavy-set man with a beard and eyes that seemed to photograph everything they saw. He slid a thick manila envelope across the sticky table. "You are not going to like what is in there, Mr. Sterling," Marcus said, his voice gravelly, "but you need to see it." Donald opened the envelope. The first few photos were exactly what he expected. High-resolution images of Glenda and David in Miami, kissing by the pool, holding hands at dinner, entering the hotel suite. They were painful to look at, but they were redundant. Donald already knew about the affair. He flipped past them to the documents in the back of the stack. "Here is the real dirt," Marcus said, pointing a thick finger at a spreadsheet. "I dug into David Thorne's history. This isn't his first rodeo. He has a pattern. Every 2 years, like clockwork, he targets a female subordinate. Usually someone married, usually someone ambitious but insecure. He wines them, dines them, promises them promotions. And then?" Donald asked, studying the list of names. "And then he uses them to sign off on fraudulent invoices," Marcus continued, "just like he is doing with your wife. He siphons about $200,000 to $300,000 through shell companies. Once the money is gone, he dumps the girl. When they threaten to expose him, he blackmails them. He threatens to tell their husbands about the affair. He threatens to ruin their careers with the fraud they signed off on. He traps them." Donald felt a cold chill run down his spine. It was monstrous. Glenda wasn't just a cheater. She was a victim in a predatory cycle. She was being groomed for slaughter. "What happened to these other women?" Donald asked, pointing to the names. "Sarah Jenkins, Michelle Ross, Elena Gomez." "Sarah Jenkins had a nervous breakdown and moved back to Ohio," Marcus said grimly. "Michelle Ross was fired for cause and blacklisted from the industry." "Elena Gomez. She took her own life 3 years ago. The pressure was too much." Donald looked up, his eyes locking with Arthur's. The anger that had been fueling him shifted into something heavier. This wasn't just about his marriage anymore. This was about justice. David Thorne was a serial destroyer of lives, and he was doing it inside Donald's building, under Donald's roof. "The company, Omnicorp, covers it up," Arthur added, adjusting his glasses. "We found records of settlements. Non-disclosure agreements signed by the survivors. The board knows Thorne brings in revenue, so they look the other way when he burns an assistant. They pay out the hush money and bury the scandal." "Not this time," Donald said, his voice low and dangerous. He closed the folder. This time he picked the wrong woman. Not because Glenda is special, but because her husband owns the ground he stands on. "So what is the play?" Arthur asked. "We have the proof of fraud. We have the proof of the affair. We can go to the police right now." "No," Donald said. "If we go to the police now, Omnicorp's lawyers will swarm. They will claim Glenda was the mastermind and David was a victim of her seduction. They will spin it. I need to catch him in the act. I need to expose him in front of the people he fears the most. The board of directors, the global CEO." "Friday," Arthur nodded. "The board meeting." "Friday," Donald confirmed. "Marcus, I want you to find Sarah Jenkins and Michelle Ross. Offer them whatever they want. Money, legal protection, anonymity. I just need their statements. I need to establish the pattern so that when Glenda goes down, she doesn't go down alone." "I will find them," Marcus promised. Donald left the diner with the envelope tucked under his arm. He drove home, his mind racing. He had to go back to the house. He had to face Glenda. He had to look her in the eye, knowing she was a criminal, knowing she was being used, and knowing that he held the power to save her or destroy her. It was a strange burden. Part of him wanted to shake her, to scream at her that she was signing her own death warrant. But the other part, the part that remembered the janitor insults, the part that remembered the mockery, held him back. She had made her choice. She had chosen ambition over loyalty. She had to learn the lesson. He pulled into the driveway. The lights were on. He walked inside, hiding the envelope in his toolbox in the garage before entering the kitchen. Glenda was sitting at the table, surrounded by papers. She looked manic. Her hair was pulled back tight, her eyes wide and feverish. She was typing furiously on her laptop. "Hey!" Donald said, grabbing a water from the fridge. Working late? Glenda didn't even look up. You wouldn't understand, Donald. I am managing complex vendor relationships. David is relying on me to clean up the department's backlog before the board meeting. I have signed off on 3 contracts tonight alone. 3 contracts. 3 counts of fraud. Donald took a sip of water, watching her. Is that safe? He asked innocently. Signing things so fast? Glenda stopped typing and looked at him with a sneer. Safe? Donald, this is business. It is about risk and reward. Something you know nothing about. You plunge toilets, I move capital. Please just go watch your TV shows and let the adults work. Donald nodded slowly. Okay, Glenda, I will let the adults work. He walked into the living room and sat on the worn-out sofa. He didn't turn on the TV. He sat in silence, listening to her typing in the other room. Click, click, click. Each keystroke was another nail in her coffin. He felt a profound sense of detachment. The woman in the kitchen wasn't the woman he had married. That woman was gone, consumed by the corporate machine and her own vanity. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur. We have a problem. The global CEO, Mr. Sterling, no relation, is arriving early. He will be in the building tomorrow for a preliminary inspection. Thorne is planning a walkthrough. Donald stared at the screen. A walkthrough. That meant David would be parading through the building, showing off his domain. And Donald would be there in his blue jumpsuit, scrubbing the floors. It was the perfect opportunity. He texted back, "Let them come. I will be ready." The next morning, the atmosphere in the Sterling Heights Tower was electric. The janitorial staff had been ordered to double polish the marble floors in the lobby. The security guards were wearing their dress uniforms. Donald clocked in at 5, as usual. He mopped the lobby, keeping his head down, but his eyes were everywhere. At 10 o'clock, the entourage arrived. A fleet of black SUVs pulled up to the entrance. The global CEO of Omnicorp, a stern-looking man named Richard Sterling, a coincidence that always amused Donald, stepped out. He was flanked by assistants and lawyers. And there, greeting him with a smile that looked like it had been surgically attached, was David Thorne. Glenda stood a few steps behind David, holding a tablet, looking nervous but eager to please. "Welcome, Richard," David boomed, shaking the CEO's hand. "Welcome to our flagship office. We have made some incredible improvements since your last visit." Richard Sterling looked around the lobby, nodding critically. "It looks clean, David. That is a start. How are the numbers?" "Through the roof," David said, guiding the group toward the elevators. "Efficiency is up 40%. And thanks to my new Director of Operations, Glenda here, we have streamlined our vendor procurement process." Richard glanced at Glenda. She stepped forward, beaming. "It is an honor to meet you, sir. We have been working hard to optimize our supply chain." "Excellent," Richard said. "I look forward to seeing the reports." The group moved toward the elevators. Donald was standing near a large potted plant, holding a spray bottle and a rag. David saw him. He stopped. A cruel glint appeared in his eyes. He wanted to show the CEO how dominant he was, how he commanded every aspect of the building. "Hold on a second, Richard," David said. He walked over to Donald. "Hey, buddy, you missed a spot over there." He pointed to a pristine patch of marble. Donald looked up, locking eyes with David. He saw the arrogance, the absolute certainty that he was untouchable. "I will get right on it, sir," Donald said, his voice steady. David sneered. "And tuck in your shirt, you look like a slob. We have VIPs in the building, have some respect." Glenda looked away, pretending not to know the man being humiliated. She studied her tablet intently, her cheeks flushing pink. She was ashamed of him. She was ashamed of her husband in front of the people she was helping to rob. Donald tucked in his shirt slowly. He didn't break eye contact with David. "I have a lot of respect, Mr. Thorne." "More than you know." David scoffed and turned back to the CEO. "Sorry about that, Richard. Hard to get good help these days. Shall we go up?" The elevator doors closed, swallowing the group of sharks. Donald stood alone in the lobby. He put the spray bottle down. The mask of normalcy was slipping. He had played the fool long enough. He had the recordings. He had the financial records. He had the PI hunting down past victims. Now he needed to close the net. He took out his phone and called Arthur. "Did you see that?" Arthur asked. He had been watching on the security feed. "I saw it," Donald said. "He just dug the hole a little deeper. Arthur, I want to trigger the audit." "Now?" Arthur asked. No, not the official one. I want you to trigger an internal flag in Omnicorp's system, something that looks like a glitch. Send an automated alert to Glenda's email questioning the Apex Solutions invoice. I want to see how she reacts. I want to see if she runs to David or if she tries to cover it up herself. I can do that, Arthur said. It will hit her inbox in 5 minutes. Donald went to the service closet and changed out of his jumpsuit. He put on his street clothes. He was done scrubbing floors for the day. He needed to be in position. He went to a coffee shop across the street from the tower, a place with a clear view of the lobby. He sat by the window, ordered a black coffee and waited. 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed. It was an intercept from Glenda's phone. She was calling David. Donald put his earbud in. "David, pick up! Pick up!" Glenda's voice was panicked, breathless. "What is it?" "I'm in the middle of the tour with Richard," David hissed, whispering. "I just got a flag from compliance," Glenda cried. "They are asking for a breakdown of services for Apex Solutions. They want itemized receipts, David. You said they wouldn't ask. You said it was a retainer." "Calm down," David snapped. "It is just an automated system. Do not reply to it. I will handle it from the admin side. Just delete the email." "Delete it? But it is in the system. If I delete it, it looks like I'm hiding something. Do as I say, Glenda. Delete the email. I have a guy in IT who will wipe the log. Just keep smiling, and do not let Richard see you sweating. We are almost at the finish line." The line went dead. Donald took a sip of coffee. She was terrified. She was beginning to realize that she was walking on a tightrope without a net. And David had just told her to destroy evidence. Donald texted Arthur again. She took the bait. She is going to delete the email. Capture the keystroke. We have her on destruction of evidence now, too. "Got it," Arthur replied. "We have enough to send them both to prison for 10 years, Donald. Are you sure you want to wait until Friday?" "I am sure," Donald typed. "Friday is the performance. I want the audience to be seated." He watched the building. He saw the shimmering glass reflecting the clouds. It was his legacy, his father's legacy, and these parasites were eating it from the inside out. He felt a deep, cold sorrow for Glenda. She had been his wife. She had been his partner, but she had let the rot in. And now she had to be excised along with it. He finished his coffee and stood up. He had one more stop to make. He needed to visit the Alliance. He needed to talk to the one person who hated David Thorne as much as he did. David's wife. He had found her name in the files Marcus provided. Victoria Thorne. She lived in a sprawling estate in the hills, a gilded cage bought with dirty money. Donald got in his car and drove toward the hills. He wasn't going as the janitor. He wasn't going as the billionaire. He was going as a man who had been wronged, looking for a partner in vengeance. As he drove, he rehearsed what he would say. He wouldn't plea. He wouldn't beg. He would simply lay the photos on the table and ask her if she was tired of looking the other way. Because if Marcus was right, Victoria Thorne wasn't just a housewife. She was the daughter of one of the original board members. She held voting power. And if Donald could turn her, he wouldn't just fire David. He would obliterate him. The investigation was over. The evidence was gathered. The trap was set. Now it was time to gather the execution squad. Donald turned up the radio, drowning out the silence of his empty passenger seat. He was alone, but for the first time in a long time he didn't feel lonely. He felt powerful. Donald pulled his luxury sedan up to the wrought iron gates of the Thorne estate. The house was a monstrosity of modern architecture, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling glass, perched on a hill that overlooked the city like a fortress. It was a house built on intimidation, much like the man who owned it. Donald pressed the intercom button. A crackly voice answered, likely a housekeeper. He didn't give his name. He simply said he had a delivery for Mrs. Victoria Thorne regarding the Sterling Heights Tower. The gates buzzed and swung open slowly. As he drove up the winding driveway, Donald felt a strange sense of kinship with the woman he was about to meet. They were both living in illusions created by David Thorne, though their cages were very different. His was made of blue-collar invisibility, and hers was made of gold and silence. He parked the car and walked to the massive front door. It was opened by a woman who looked nothing like the broken housewife he had expected. Victoria Thorne was striking, tall with ice-blonde hair and eyes that were sharp and assessing. She wore a silk blouse and trousers that probably cost more than Donald's entire wardrobe in his janitor persona. She looked at him, confused by his appearance. He was dressed in his suit, the one he wore for board meetings, not the jumpsuit. "Can I help you?" she asked, her hand resting on the doorframe, blocking his entry. "You said you had a delivery regarding the tower." "I do," Donald said, his voice calm and low. "But it isn't a package, it is information. My name is Donald Sterling. I own the building your husband works in, and I think we have a mutual problem." Victoria's eyes widened slightly at the name. She knew the name Sterling. Everyone in the city's upper crust knew the Sterling family. She stepped back, her guard dropping just an inch. "The owner?" "David always says the owner is a recluse. He says he deals with a management firm." "I am the management firm," Donald said. "May I come in?" She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. But if this is about David's lease, you should talk to his lawyers." "It is not about the lease," Donald said, stepping into the foyer. "It is about his conduct, and it is about my wife." They sat in a living room that felt more like a museum than a home. White furniture, abstract art, no photos of family. Donald wasted no time. He placed the envelope Marcus had given him on the glass coffee table. He didn't open it. He just left it there. A brown square of destruction in the middle of the pristine room. "David is having an affair with my wife, Glenda," Donald stated flatly. "He is also using her to embezzle money from Omnicorp through fraudulent vendor contracts. I have the bank records, I have the audio recordings, and I have the photos." Victoria didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She reached for a silver cigarette case on the table, took out a slim cigarette and lit it with a trembling hand. She exhaled a plume of smoke toward the high ceiling. "You are not the first husband to come here, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice weary. "David has appetites. He gets bored. He finds a new toy at the office. He plays with her for a year or two. Then he discards her. I usually just look the other way. He brings home the money, and I keep the lifestyle. It is a transaction. Why should I care about this one?" "Because this one is different," Donald said, leaning forward. "This time, he didn't just target a secretary. He targeted the wife of the man who owns the roof over his head. And I am not looking for a settlement, Victoria. I am looking for a demolition." Victoria tapped ash into a crystal tray. "So what do you want from me?" "I did my research," Donald said. "Your father was one of the founding investors of Omnicorp. You hold a seat on the board of directors. You have voting power." Victoria nodded slowly. "I do, but I rarely use it. David handles the business." "Not this Friday," Donald said. "This Friday, I'm going to expose him. I'm going to reveal the fraud, the harassment and the theft. I'm going to present evidence that will not only get him fired, but will likely send him to prison. If you stand by him, you will go down with him. The assets will be frozen. The reputation of the Thorn name will be destroyed. You will lose this house, you will lose your standing." Victoria stopped smoking. She looked at the envelope, then at Donald. "But," Donald continued, his voice softening, "if you align with me, if you vote to remove him, if you file for divorce before the meeting starts and present yourself as a victim of his manipulation, you can save your share. You can walk away with your dignity and your inheritance intact. I am offering you a lifeboat, Victoria, but you have to cut the anchor." Victoria stared at him. For the first time, the icy facade cracked. He saw the anger beneath, the years of humiliation, the years of knowing her husband was out with other women while she sat in this empty glass house. "He calls you a janitor," she said quietly. "He told me the husband of his new mistress was a janitor. He laughs about it." "I am a janitor," Donald said, "and I am a billionaire. I choose to be one. He pretends to be the other." Victoria crushed the cigarette out. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "He has humiliated me for 15 years, Mr. Sterling. He thinks I am stupid. He thinks I am just a trophy that stays on the shelf." "Then take yourself off the shelf," Donald said, standing up to join her. "Help me end it." Victoria turned. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to be at the board meeting on Friday," Donald said. "I need you to bring the other board members to my side before we even walk in the room. And when I play the recording, I need you to be the one who makes the motion to terminate him." Victoria smiled. It was a small, cold smile, a smile that promised pain. "I will do it. Not for you, Mr. Sterling, but because I am tired of being the wife who looks away. I want to see his face when he realizes I am the one who pulled the trigger. "We have a deal then," Donald said, extending his hand. Victoria shook it. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "We have a deal. Destroy him, Donald. Leave nothing left." Donald left the estate feeling a grim satisfaction. The alliance was forming. He drove back toward the city, but he had one more stop. Marcus had texted him an address. It was a small apartment complex in a working-class neighborhood. It was where Sarah Jenkins lived, the woman who had fled to Ohio and then returned, trying to rebuild her life after David Thorne shattered it. He met Sarah in a nearby park. She was young, barely 30, but she looked older. She was nervous, clutching her purse as if she expected David to jump out from behind a tree. Marcus stood nearby, keeping watch. "Mr. Sterling?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "The investigator said you could help me get justice, but I signed an NDA. If I talk, they will sue me for everything I have." "They won't sue you," Donald said gently, sitting on the bench beside her, "because by the time this is over, the people who would sue you will be in handcuffs. I am not asking you to go to the press yet. I am asking you to sign a sworn affidavit. I want you to tell the truth about what David did to you, how he pressured you, how he used the company money." Sarah looked down at her hands. "He ruined my career. I was a good accountant. Now I work in a bakery because nobody will hire me. He blacklisted me. He told everyone I stole from him." "That ends on Friday," Donald said. "I promise you, Sarah, if you help me, I will personally ensure your record is cleared, and I will hire you. I need good accountants in my organization. People with integrity." Sarah looked up, tears in her eyes. "You would do that?" "I would," Donald said. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, I will sign it. I will tell them everything." Donald watched as Marcus helped her with the paperwork. He felt the weight of responsibility growing. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was a crusade. He was fighting for Glenda, in a way. He was fighting for the woman she could have been if she hadn't fallen into David's trap. But he knew that Glenda was too far gone to be saved. She had become a perpetrator. She had joined the wolves. He returned home late that evening. The house was quiet. Glenda was in the bedroom packing a suitcase, not the small carry-on she usually took for trips, but a large, hard shell case. She was humming to herself. "Going somewhere?" Donald asked from the doorway, leaning against the frame. Glenda jumped, startled. She turned around holding a stack of blouses. "Oh, you scared me." "Yes, David. The company is sending us to a leadership retreat this weekend. It is very exclusive. Only the top executives." "A retreat," Donald repeated. "On the same weekend as the board meeting." Glenda froze for a split second, then recovered. "The board meeting is Friday morning. We fly out Friday afternoon. It is a celebration. We are expecting great news." She went back to packing her back to him. Donald watched her. She was packing her best clothes, the red dress David liked, the expensive lingerie. She was packing for a new life. Donald walked into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "You seem very happy lately, Glenda. Like you are planning something big." Glenda stopped. She turned to face him, a strange expression on her face. It was a mixture of pity and contempt. "Look, Donald, since you brought it up, we need to talk about the future." "The future?" Donald asked. "Yes." Glenda walked over to her nightstand and pulled out a document. "I have been thinking. With my promotion, things are going to get complicated. Financially, tax brackets and liability. My financial advisor, meant to say the company's advisor, suggested we sign a separation of assets agreement just to protect us. To protect you, really. If the market crashes, I don't want your little savings to be affected by my corporate risks." Donald took the document. He scanned it. It wasn't a protection agreement. It was a post-nuptial agreement that effectively waived his rights to any of her future earnings, and more importantly, transferred the title of their house solely to her name in exchange for a lump sum payment of $10,000. She was trying to buy him out of his own home for pennies before she divorced him. She wanted the house so she could sell it and keep the profit. "She really thinks I am an idiot," Donald thought. "This seems complicated," Donald said, scratching his head, playing the role. "I don't understand all this legal talk, Glenda." "It is simple, honey," Glenda said, putting a hand on his shoulder, her touch condescending. "It just means that what is mine, and what is yours is yours. It is for the best. Just sign it." Donald looked at her hand on his shoulder, the hand that had signed fraudulent invoices, the hand that had caressed David Thorne. "Okay," Donald said. "If you say it is for the best." He took a pen from the nightstand. He signed the document. He knew it was worthless. His lawyers would shred it in court, proving it was signed under duress and without legal counsel. But signing it now gave her a false sense of security. It made her arrogant, and arrogance was the enemy of caution. Glenda smiled, snatching the paper away as soon as the ink was dry. "Wonderful. You are doing the right thing, Donald." "Really?" She kissed him on the cheek. It was a cold, dry kiss, a kiss goodbye. "I am going to finish packing," she said. "You should get some sleep. You have to get up early for whatever it is you do." "I do," Donald said. "I have a very big job tomorrow." He walked out of the bedroom, leaving her to her fantasy. He went to the kitchen and made a phone call to Arthur. "She signed her death warrant?" Arthur asked. "She tried to get me to sign away the house," Donald said. "She is clearing the decks, Arthur. She plans to serve me divorce papers as soon as she gets that promotion on Friday. She wants to kick me out and move on with David." "Well, she is in for a shock," Arthur said. "Everything is in place. Victoria Thorne is on board. The board members have been briefed by her privately. They are expecting your arrival." "And the journalist? He is ready?" Donald asked. "Yes, Mark Salinger from the City Chronicle. He has the exclusives on the Apex Solutions fraud. He is waiting for your signal to publish. As soon as the meeting is over, the story goes live. David won't just be fired. He will be front-page news." "Good," Donald said. He hung up. Thursday passed in a blur of silent tension. Donald went to work, scrubbing floors, emptying trash cans. He saw Glenda in the hallways, walking briskly, ignoring him completely. She was in her element, or so she thought. She was barking orders at assistants, strutting through the office like she already owned it. David was equally pompous, high-fiving junior executives, bragging about the quarterly numbers that were inflated by his own crimes. Thursday night, the night before the nuclear strike, Donald sat in his car outside the house. He didn't want to go in yet. He looked at the uniform in the back seat. Tomorrow he wouldn't wear it. Tomorrow he would wear the suit. But he would carry the spirit of the janitor with him, the invisible man who saw everything. He walked into the house. Glenda was already asleep, resting up for her big day. Her suitcase was by the door, ready to go. Donald went to the guest room. He couldn't sleep in the same bed with her, not tonight. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the last 5 years, the good moments, the laughter. It all felt like a movie he had watched a long time ago. The nostalgia was dead. All that was left was the cold, hard need for closure. He sent one final text to the group chat he had created with Arthur, Marcus, and Victoria. "The stage is set. We execute at 0900 hours. The replies came in quickly. Arthur: "Ready." Marcus: "Witnesses secured." Victoria: "I will see you in the boardroom." Donald closed his eyes. He slept peacefully for the first time in a week. Friday morning arrived with a grey, overcast sky. The air was heavy, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Donald woke up at 5, but he didn't put on the jumpsuit. He showered and shaved closely. He went to his hidden stash and pulled out his best suit, a navy blue custom-tailored piece that screamed power. He put on a crisp white shirt and a silk tie in a deep crimson red. He packed a bag. He wasn't coming back to this house tonight. He put the deed to the house, the real deed, in his briefcase. He put the divorce papers his lawyer had drafted in there too, and finally, he put the recordings and the financial files. He walked out to the kitchen. Glenda was there, drinking coffee, fully dressed in her power suit. She looked up, and her coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. She stared at him. She stared at the suit, the fit, the fabric, the way he carried himself. "Donald?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What? What are you wearing?" "I have a meeting," Donald said calmly. He poured himself a cup of coffee, moving with a grace she had never seen before. "A meeting? With who?" "The sanitation department." Glenda laughed nervously. "You look like you are going to a funeral." "Maybe I am," Donald said, taking a sip. He checked his watch. "It is time to go, Glenda. You don't want to be late for the board meeting." "I am driving myself," she said quickly. "I don't want you dropping me off in your truck." I wasn't planning on taking the truck, Donald said. He walked past her out the front door. He didn't walk to the rusted pickup truck. He walked to the black luxury sedan that his driver had delivered to the driveway during the night. Glenda followed him to the door, her mouth agape. "Whose car is that?" she shrieked. "Donald, did you steal a car?" Donald opened the driver's door. He looked back at her. The woman who had mocked him. The woman who had betrayed him. "See you at the office, Glenda," he said. He got in and revved the engine. The powerful purr of the motor drowned out her confused questions. He backed out of the driveway and drove toward the city. The ride was smooth. He felt a sense of clarity. The pieces were moving. The pawns were in place. The king was coming out of the shadows. He arrived at the Sterling Heights Tower. He didn't park in the service lot. He pulled up to the main entrance. The valet, who usually ignored the janitor, saw the car and ran over to open the door. "Good morning, sir," the valet said. "Good morning," Donald said, handing him the keys and $100 bill. "Keep it close. I will need it later." He walked into the lobby. The security guard, seeing the suit and the confidence, nodded respectfully. He wasn't invisible anymore. He walked straight to the elevators. He didn't wait for the freight elevator. He pressed the button for the executive lift. As the doors opened, he saw David Thorne standing there, waiting to go up, holding a coffee and looking at his phone. David looked up. He saw the suit. He saw the face. Recognition took a second to register because the context was so wrong. "Donald," David asked, squinting, "what the hell are you doing? And where did you get that suit? Is it a rental?" Donald stepped into the elevator beside him. He pressed the button for the top floor. The boardroom. "It is not a rental, David," Donald said, facing forward as the doors closed, trapping them together. "And I'm going to the same place you are." David laughed, a nervous, confused sound. "You can't go up there. The board is meeting. Security." "There is no security coming," Donald said softly. The elevator rose. The silence was thick. David looked at Donald, really looked at him, and for the first time he felt a flicker of fear. The man standing next to him didn't smell like bleach. He smelled like money. "You are fired," David spat out, trying to regain control. "As soon as we get off this elevator, you are fired. Get your things and get out of my building." "Your building?" Donald turned his head slowly to look at David. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. They weren't on the 30th floor. They were on the 41st, the private boardroom level, a floor David had only visited by invitation. The hallway was lined with board members, and at the end of the hall, standing by the double doors, was Victoria Thorne. She looked at David, then at Donald. She nodded. "After you, Mr. Sterling," she said to Donald. David froze. He looked at his wife. He looked at the janitor. He looked at the name on the wall. Sterling Holdings. Donald stepped out of the elevator. He adjusted his cuffs. "Shall we begin?" Donald asked. The trap had snapped shut. The silence in the hallway on the 41st floor was absolute. David Thorne stood frozen, his eyes darting from his wife Victoria to the man standing next to him, the man he had called a loser, the man he had ridiculed for wearing a name patch. Now that man was adjusting a silk tie that cost more than David's car payment, and the board of directors was looking at him with deference. Victoria broke the silence. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She didn't look at her husband. She looked at Donald. "The board is assembled, Mr. Sterling," she said. "We are ready to proceed with the emergency session." David sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "Mr. Sterling?" "Victoria, what is going on? This is the janitor. This is Donald. He fixes the toilets. Why are you calling him Mr. Sterling?" Donald stepped past David. He didn't look back. He walked toward the double mahogany doors of the boardroom. The security guards opened them for him. He walked to the head of the table, the seat usually reserved for the chairman. He sat down. David ran into the room after him. "You cannot sit there. That is the chairman's seat." "Richard, tell him." Richard Sterling, the global CEO, was sitting to the right of the head chair. He looked at David with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. He didn't stand up. He didn't offer a handshake. "Sit down, David," Richard said coldly. "And for the record, Donald Sterling is the chairman. He owns Sterling Holdings. He owns this building. And technically, he owns the lease you are currently violating." David felt the blood drain from his face. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. The janitor. The man he had mocked for months, the man whose wife he was sleeping with. He was the landlord. He was the billionaire recluse everyone whispered about. At that moment, the doors swung open again. Glenda burst in. She was flushed, holding her briefcase, looking frantic but excited. "I am so sorry I am late," she announced, breathless. The traffic was a nightmare, and the elevators were... She stopped. She dropped her briefcase. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. She saw the board members. She saw the global CEO. She saw David, pale and shaking, standing by a chair. And then she looked at the head of the table. She saw Donald. He was sitting there like a king. His suit was impeccable. His gaze was steady. He looked nothing like the man she had said goodbye to in the kitchen an hour ago. "Donald?" she whispered. What are you doing here? Did you bring me coffee? You cannot be in here, honey. This is a board meeting." Donald didn't smile. He didn't blink. He pressed a button on the console in front of him. A large screen descended from the ceiling behind him. "Take a seat, Glenda," Donald said. His voice was deep, commanding, echoing off the walls. "You are right, this is a board meeting, and you are the main topic of discussion." Glenda looked at David for help, but David was staring at the table, defeated. She slowly sat down in the nearest empty chair, her hands trembling. Donald opened a file in front of him. "We are here to discuss the termination of David Thorne and Glenda Sterling, effectively immediately, for cause. The causes include corporate embezzlement, fraud, gross misconduct, and violation of the company's ethics policy." David slammed his hand on the table. "You have no proof. You cannot fire me. I bring in the numbers. I am the rainmaker." Donald pressed a button on his laptop. The audio system in the room crackled to life. "Just sign right here on the dotted line, babe. It is just a standard vendor procurement form." Glenda's voice filled the room. "I do not know David. This invoice is for a company called Apex Solutions. I have never heard of them." David's voice again. "That is why you are still a director, and I am a VP. If you want that vice president title, you need to show the board that you are decisive." The recording continued. It played the moment she signed. It played the moment she agreed to delete the email from compliance. It played the sound of them laughing about the janitor husband. "He looks like a giant blue Smurf in that jumpsuit. Does he actually come home wearing that trash every day? It is disgusting. I tell him to shower at the gym." Glenda covered her mouth with her hand. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of terror. Everyone was listening. The global CEO, the board, Victoria Thorne. They were all listening to her mock her husband while conspiring to commit fraud. Donald stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. "Apex Solutions," Donald said, sliding a document down the table toward Richard, "is a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The sole beneficiary is David Thorne. Over the last 5 years, he has siphoned $3 million from Omnicorp using false vendor contracts. And for the last 6 months, Glenda Sterling has been his accomplice, signing off on over $200,000 in fraudulent payments." "It is a lie," David screamed. "She did it. She came to me. She seduced me. She wanted the money." Glenda's head snapped up. "You liar. You told me it was standard procedure. You told me it was a retainer." Donald raised a hand. Silence. He looked at David. "We have affidavits from Sarah Jenkins and Michelle Ross. They confirm your pattern, David. You target women. You use them. You discard them, but this time you made a mistake. You targeted my wife, and you did it in my house." Victoria Thorne stood up. She held a manila envelope in her hand. She walked over to David. She didn't look sad. She looked liberated. "You are fired, David," she said. "The board has already voted, but that is the least of your problems." She slapped the envelope onto his chest. "These are divorce papers," she said, "and a restraining order, and an eviction notice. You have 1 hour to vacate the estate. I am keeping the house, I am keeping the cars. And since you violated the morality clause in our prenup by committing a felony, you get nothing." David stared at her. "Victoria? You cannot do this. I am your husband. You are a liability," Victoria said coldly. Donald turned his eyes to Glenda. She was shrinking in her chair, trying to make herself invisible. "And you," Donald said. Glenda looked at him, her eyes pleading. "Donald, please. I didn't know. He tricked me. I was just trying to do a good job. I did it for us. For our future. I wanted to buy us a better house. I wanted you to stop being a janitor. Stop lying, Donald said. His voice wasn't angry. It was just tired. You didn't do it for us. You did it for you. You were ashamed of me. You mocked me. You cheated on me. You planned to divorce me and leave me with nothing. He picked up a document from his folder. It was the separation of assets agreement she had made him sign. You wanted a separation of assets, Glenda. You wanted to make sure what is yours, and what is mine is mine. He stood up and walked over to her. He dropped a thick stack of papers in front of her. Here is your separation. I am granting your request. I am filing for divorce. Since you signed the post-nuptial agreement last night, you have waived your right to my assets. You get to keep your debt. You get to keep your criminal charges. And you get to keep the plastic keychain you bought me at the airport. He reached into his pocket and tossed the cheap plastic palm tree onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of her. Glenda stared at the keychain. Then she stared at Donald. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't just leaving her. He was the billionaire she had always wanted to marry. She had been sleeping next to a fortune for 5 years, and she had thrown it away for a middle manager who was currently being evicted by his own wife. "Donald, I love you," she cried, grabbing his arm. "I didn't mean any of it. Please give me a chance to explain." Donald pulled his arm away as if she burned him. Security. 2 burly guards stepped forward. They grabbed David by the arms. He was struggling, shouting threats, promising to sue everyone. They grabbed Glenda, who was sobbing, reaching out for Donald. "Get them out of my building," Donald said, "and call the police. They are waiting in the lobby." As they were dragged out of the boardroom, David screaming and Glenda crying, Donald didn't watch them go. He sat back down. He looked at Richard Sterling. "I apologize for the disruption," Donald said calmly. "Now, about the lease renegotiation." The meeting continued for another hour. Donald was efficient, brilliant, and ruthless. He secured better terms for his building. He ensured that the employees who had been mistreated by David would be compensated. When the meeting adjourned, the board members shook his hand with genuine respect. Donald took the elevator down to the lobby, but he didn't go out the front door. He went to his private office on the ground floor. He sat behind his desk and turned on the TV. The news was already breaking. Mark Salinger had published the article. The headline flashed across the screen: "Scandal at Omnicorp. Executive exposed in $1 million fraud and sexual predation ring." There were photos of David being led into a police car. There was a photo of Glenda looking disheveled and terrified, covering her face with her hands as she was questioned by officers on the sidewalk. Donald's phone began to ring. It was a number he knew. Glenda. She was calling him. Probably from the police station. Probably using her one phone call. He watched the phone vibrate on his desk. He let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. He thought about answering. He thought about hearing her beg. But he realized he had nothing left to say to her. The dialogue was over. The script was finished. But then he thought about the closure. He picked up the phone. "Donald!" Glenda's voice was a shriek of panic. "Donald, you have to help me. They are charging me with fraud. They say I'm facing 5 years. You have to get me a lawyer. You have money, Donald. I know you have money. Please, I am your wife." Donald listened to her desperation. It was the sound of a person who had never faced consequences finally hitting the wall. "Glenda," Donald said quietly. Yes, honey, I am here. Please, you are not my wife," Donald said. "You are the defendant. But I love you. You cannot leave me here." "I already left," Donald said. He paused. He looked at the empty office, at the city outside the window, at the world that was finally seeing him clearly. "I know everything, Glenda. Talk to my lawyer." He hung up the phone. He blocked the number. He stood up and walked to the window. He saw the police cars driving away. He saw the press vans packing up. The storm was passing. He walked out of his office and into the lobby. Samuel, the security guard who had known him as the janitor for years, was standing there. Samuel looked at Donald's suit. He looked at the way Donald walked. "Mr. Sterling?" Samuel asked, confused. Donald smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Hello, Sam," Donald said. "Is it true?" Samuel asked. "You own the place?" Donald looked around the lobby, the marble floors he had polished, the brass railings he had shined. He knew every inch of this building. He had earned it twice, once by inheritance and once by sweat. "Yes, Sam," Donald said. "I own the place." "And Sam," "Yes, sir. Take the rest of the day off, with pay. Donald walked out the front doors. The air was fresh. The sun was breaking through the clouds. He walked to his car. He didn't look back at the tower. He didn't look back at the jail where his wife was sitting. He got into his car and drove away. He had one more stop to make, a victory lap of sorts, but not a loud one, a quiet one. He drove to the small bakery where Sarah Jenkins worked. He walked in. She was behind the counter, looking nervous as she watched the news on a small TV in the corner. She saw him enter. She saw the news report about David's arrest. She ran around the counter and hugged him. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you." "You are welcome," Donald said. "You start on Monday. Accounting department. Direct report to the new VP." "Who is the new VP?" Sarah asked, wiping her eyes. "I am still looking," Donald said. "But I have a feeling I will find someone who values honesty over ambition." He bought a coffee and a croissant. He sat by the window and ate it slowly. He was alone. He was divorced. He was betrayed. But for the first time in 5 years, he was free. The phone in his pocket buzzed again. It wasn't Glenda. It was a text from Victoria Thorne. "It is done. He is gone. Thank you, Donald." Donald typed a reply. "Live your life, Victoria." He put the phone away. The nuclear strike was successful. The enemy was destroyed. The collateral damage was contained. Now, all that was left was the resolution, the final act of turning the page. Donald finished his coffee, stood up, and walked out into the city that he helped build, ready to finally live in it as himself. The holding cell was cold, smelling faintly of bleach and despair, a scent that Glenda had once mocked on her husband's clothes, but now surrounded her like a suffocating blanket. She sat on the metal bench, her expensive suit wrinkled and stained, her high heels kicked off into the corner. It had been 6 hours since the police dragged her out of the Sterling Heights tower. 6 hours of processing, fingerprinting, and the humiliation of having her mugshot taken. She had used her one phone call to try and reach Donald again, but the line had gone straight to voicemail. She had left a sobbing, incoherent message, begging for forgiveness, begging for bail money, begging for the life she had just incinerated. Across the hallway in a separate cell, David Thorne was not crying. He was pacing like a caged animal, shouting at the guard, demanding to see his lawyer, demanding to speak to the mayor. He was still trying to play the power game, oblivious to the fact that his chips had been confiscated. Glenda watched him through the bars. The man she had thought was her ticket to the high life looked small and pathetic now. He wasn't a visionary. He was just a con artist in a torn shirt. When he caught her looking at him, he didn't offer a look of solidarity. He spat on the floor. "You did this," David hissed, his voice echoing in the concrete corridor. "If you hadn't signed those papers so quickly, if you had just questioned the accounting like a normal person, we would have had time to cover our tracks. You were greedy, Glenda. You were sloppy." Glenda stared at him, her mouth falling open. "I was greedy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You told me it was standard procedure. You told me you loved me. You said we were going to run the company together." David laughed, a harsh barking sound. "I said what I had to say to get the invoices signed. You were a useful idiot, Glenda. Nothing more. Did you really think I was going to leave Victoria for you? Victoria is worth $50 million. You are a middle manager with a mortgage and a janitor for a husband. You were a distraction, a fun little diversion to pass the time." The words hit Glenda harder than the handcuffs had. A useful idiot. A diversion. She curled her knees to her chest and buried her face in her arms. She thought about Donald. She thought about the way he used to rub her feet after a long day. She thought about the way he cooked dinner every night, listening to her complain about her stressful job while he had spent his day cleaning up other people's filth. He had been the only real thing in her life, and she had treated him like a stain to be wiped away. Now she was the stain. 3 months later, the courtroom was quiet as the judge leafed through the final divorce settlement. Donald sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Arthur Vance. He looked rested, healthy, and sharp in a grey suit. He didn't look at Glenda. Glenda sat at the defendant's table with a court-appointed public defender because she couldn't afford a private attorney. Her assets had been frozen pending the fraud investigation. She looked thin and tired. Her roots were showing, and the arrogant spark in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, hollow acceptance. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at Glenda. "Mrs. Sterling, or rather soon-to-be Ms. Miller, I have reviewed the separation of assets agreement you signed 3 months ago, the one you initiated. Glenda flinched. Yes, Your Honor. The judge continued. It is a legally binding document. It clearly states that you wish to separate your financial liabilities and assets from your husband. At the time, you believed this would protect your future earnings from him. However, in light of the criminal charges and the civil lawsuit filed by Omnicorp to recover the stolen funds, this document now works in reverse. The judge turned a page. Mr. Sterling is granted full ownership of the marital home, as you waived your rights to it in exchange for a cash sum which records show you have already spent. Furthermore, since the debt incurred by the lawsuit from Omnicorp is a result of your personal criminal conduct and you signed an agreement separating your liabilities, that debt is yours alone. Mr. Sterling is not responsible for paying back the money you and Mr. Thorne stole. Glenda closed her eyes. The debt was over $200,000. With legal fees and fines, she was looking at $500,000 in the hole. She was bankrupt. And regarding the criminal charges, the judge added, looking at the prosecutor, I understand a plea deal has been reached. Yes, Your Honor, the prosecutor said. In exchange for testifying against David Thorne, Ms. Miller will serve 18 months in a minimum security facility, followed by 5 years of probation. Mr. Thorne, due to his role as the mastermind and his history of similar offenses, has been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. 18 months. Glenda felt the room spin. She was going to prison. She would have a criminal record. She would never work in corporate America again. She would never be a VP. She would be lucky to get a job as a cashier. The gavel banged. Divorce granted. Next case. Donald stood up. He shook Arthur's hand. He gathered his files. He turned to leave the courtroom. Glenda stood up too, her legs shaky. Donald, she called out softly. He stopped. He didn't turn around fully, just paused near the aisle. I am sorry, she said, tears streaming down her face. I know it doesn't matter now, but I am sorry. I lost the best thing I ever had. Donald turned his head slightly. He looked at her, not with hatred, but with a distant, calm pity. You didn't lose it, Glenda, he said softly. You threw it away. There is a difference. He walked out of the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors swinging shut behind him, closing the chapter on 5 years of his life. Donald drove his black sedan back to the suburbs. He pulled into the driveway of the house. It looked different now. The lawn was freshly mowed, the hedges trimmed. He walked inside. The house was empty. He had hired a moving crew to pack up Glenda's things, the clothes she hadn't taken to jail, her collection of shoes, her vanity mirror. He had sent them all to her mother's house in boxes. The house felt lighter. The smell of her perfume was gone, replaced by the scent of lemon oil and fresh air. Donald walked through the rooms. He went into the closet where he used to hide his suit behind his winter coats. Now the closet was full of suits. But in the back, hanging in a protective plastic bag, was the blue jumpsuit. The name Patch Donald was still stitched on the chest. He ran his hand over the rough fabric. He didn't hate the uniform. That uniform had taught him humility. It had taught him observation. It had shown him who people really were when they thought no one important was watching. He decided he wouldn't throw it away. He would keep it. He would hang it in his office at the tower as a reminder. A reminder that dignity isn't found in a title or a paycheck. It is found in how you treat others and how you respect yourself. He walked out to the backyard. He sat on the porch swing, watching the sun begin to set over the neighborhood. His phone buzzed. It was Sarah Jenkins. Hi, Mr. Sterling. Just wanted to let you know the audit is complete. We found another shell company David was using. The lawyers say we can recover another $1 million for the charity fund. Donald smiled. Great work, Sarah. You are doing an amazing job. Take the rest of the day off. He put the phone down. He wasn't just a landlord anymore. He was a leader. He had purged the toxicity from his company. He had restored the reputation of the building, and he had saved a few lives in the process. A few weeks later, Donald was walking through the lobby of the Sterling Heights Tower. He was wearing a suit, but he stopped to talk to Samuel at the security desk. How is the grandson, Sam? Donald asked. He is doing great, Mr. Sterling. He made the varsity team. That is excellent news, Donald said. Send him my regards. He continued walking. He passed a young man pushing a mop bucket. The young man looked tired, his uniform slightly too big for him. He saw Donald approaching and quickly moved out of the way, keeping his head down, trying to be invisible. Donald stopped. "Excuse me, son." The young man froze. "I am sorry, sir. I was just cleaning up this spill. I didn't mean to be in your way." Donald walked over to him. He put a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You are not in the way. You are the reason this building shines." "What is your name?" The young man looked up, surprised. "Michael, sir." "It is nice to meet you, Michael," Donald said. "I am Donald. I used to do this job. It is hard work, but it is honest work. Be proud of it." Michael smiled, a genuine relieved smile. "Thank you, sir." Donald walked toward the elevators. He pressed the button for the top floor. As he rose through the building, passing the floors of glass and steel, he thought about the journey. He thought about the day he found the hotel room, the day his heart broke, the day he decided to fight back. He realized that revenge wasn't the sweet part. Watching Glenda fall hadn't given him joy, it had just given him justice. The joy came from the reclamation. The joy came from standing in his own truth, no longer hiding, no longer pretending to be less than he was to make someone else feel big. The elevator doors opened onto the penthouse office. The view of the city was spectacular, a sprawling grid of lights against the twilight. Donald walked to the window. He saw his reflection in the glass. He didn't see a janitor, he didn't see a billionaire. He just saw a man who had cleaned up the mess and was ready to build something new. He took the plastic palm tree keychain out of his pocket. He had kept it, strangely enough. He looked at it one last time. It was a symbol of the lie he had lived. He opened the window. The wind whipped into the office, cool and strong. He tossed the keychain out. He watched it fall, tumbling down, down, down toward the street below, disappearing into the city. Donald closed the window. He turned back to his desk, where a stack of new blueprints was waiting. Plans for a new community center he was funding, plans for a scholarship program for the children of service workers. He sat down, picked up his pen, and got to work. The past was swept away, the floor was clean, and the future was spotless.